Hi everyone, and welcome back to Nasedyanka, the channel where I talk about Bulgarian history, culture, traditions, and faith. For those of you who have been following my channel, it has been probably about a month since I have made my last video. I was all of a sudden bombarded with so many life tasks and chores and things going in transition from one thing to another that I had to make do. But I haven't forgotten about this channel. I know that this is going to be just a period of time in my life when I may need to make a video once per month or once every other week, according to what I can accomplish given the time and the work that I have to be doing. But all that being said, I really wanted to send you my greetings, and again, those of you who have been watching my channel, I've been contemplating on things that you have said and questions, and I've been just contemplating how much I was missing recording those videos and sharing a little more with you all, and connecting with so many cool people from around the world. So it is already March. I pretty much skipped February, and I have prepared, now in general I've prepared many themes and many topics. It's just a matter, like I said, of time and ability. But for today specifically, I've prepared an article which I translated, again, from the Bulgarian language, from the Orthodox Christian Church of the Old Calendar in Bulgaria. Now, this is the church that did not budge. It did not accept the new calendar, and it did not accept the ecumenical, heretical ideas of current Orthodoxy. So this church has pretty much remained as it's always been. And I have very high respect for their clergy, the leaders. I mean, just for this whole idea, because that's the whole point of the church, preserving the truth. There is a difference between opinion and fact, right? Many people nowadays in modern day tend to kind of like be more inclined towards being validated for their opinions, but in reality, opinions are opinions. We can validate and we can respect them, but they don't make up reality. Facts are completely different things. So I picked up the topic, which was written, I'm sorry, not written, it actually was a lecture given publicly by, it says, Негово Преосвещенство Никополски епископ Victor. So in English language, I think that's how you guys would say, His Eminence Bishop of Nikopol, Victor is his name. Again, this is the Old Calendar Bulgarian Orthodox Church that did not budge since the heretical reformations. The topic is on contemplation, the highest form of knowledge. And as I went through this article, I translated from Bulgarian to English, and I realized that it would be quite lengthy, so I have divided it into several parts. I believe that I might be able to cover it in 2 parts, but part of me says I might need to go for a 3rd part. And so with that in mind, that's what we're going to talk about today. Another thing to mention is, obviously I have changed my decor, and I'm going to keep my videos short. You all will see I will be, just for a while, I'm not going to be taking videos of nature and traveling because of a lot of changes in my life right now. But it is March, and just wanted to mention, since this is a Bulgarian topic here, Bulgarians are celebrating March the 1st. It's been probably for thousands of years one of our national big holidays, which is called Baba Marta. It's basically the Grandma March. Now, this has nothing to do with Orthodoxy. It has nothing to do with Christianity. It comes from old pagan times. As a matter of fact, it's quite symbolic nowadays. And what it really is associated with is different stories that are being told about the colors red and white. So one of the stories is that during the Ottoman Empire, a certain soldier was missing, and his mom didn't know where he was, and she was missing him. So in her worry whether or not he was killed by the Turks, the Ottomans basically, who had occupied Bulgaria for 5 centuries at the time. She basically tore 2 strings from her cloth. So the national attire usually has white because it's cotton or linen, and then it's very common we wear red. Red is just one very common thread. So she basically pulled out 2 of those threads from her apron or from her cloth. She intertwined them together and she gave them to a bird, a swallow, with the request to please take those to her son. And in her mind, she wanted those to symbolize blessings for peace and for life. So the white would be the peace, and the red color would stand for life, that he may come back alive. Some people say that that wasn't his mom, that it was his beloved fiancé who did this. We don't know exactly, but that's folklore. And ever since then, here we are, so many years later, hundreds or thousands, because I have some suspicion on things I've read that it may actually be a tradition that's lasted longer than just a few hundred years. Bulgarians nowadays will basically wear bracelets or like little strings, symbolic for the beginning of spring. So that's the other thing that they'll associate this with. New beginnings. Seasonally, we are entering into or nearing the spring season as winter, the heavy snow of winter. Yeah, in America where I live, we don't get much snow. But in Bulgaria, we used to have heavy, serious duty snow. So seeing the first rays of the sun and the first signs of warmer weather has been celebrated, basically. Now, I don't care. I don't wear any of those. And here is a clue. When we talk about Orthodox Christianity, these things don't really make any difference. Objects cannot affect people. They can neither make you happy nor make you miserable. That's it. Period. That's a truth. That's a fact. Now, how we think about them, that's a different thing. If we make a big deal out of objects, if we believe that they have special powers, we can impart wrong ideas onto other people. So many Bulgarians, thankfully, I'm glad, they've been talking against this nowadays, specifically those who pertain to the Orthodox Church, because it's become kind of rampant that people around will put too much superstition, too much belief, almost like wear those things and you're going to be blessed for the rest of the year or something, and it just doesn't make any sense. So I just wanted to draw this to your attention. You might meet a Bulgarian or 2 in your life, and if you ever see those, bear that in mind. It's not a big deal. Tradition and symbolism are one thing. Facts are different, and the Orthodox Church has always followed together with the facts. Now, the facts include our physical realm, our mental realm, our emotional being, and our spiritual being. And if we talk about facts in terms of the allopathic Western kind of world, it's going to be difficult to make any sense of the invisible world. Well, guess what? This article here that I translated, it's really addressing that invisible and inexplainable world, which is still part of reality. Love it or hate it, there are things that some people have experienced and things that have been revealed to us that constitute factual reality. That's not about what I believe, what I think, what I imagine. And the further we go in depth with the practice, or the experience, I should say, of contemplation, the better, I hope, and the clearer this idea is going to become. Now, if you have already dug into the Orthodox Christian tradition, you might be familiar with the Jesus prayer, with the prayer of the heart, Hezekiah. Some people, again, jump into distortions of assuming that these things are somehow magical, like mantras, that we get to repeat something and we kind of like step out of our worldly being. Don't do that. Just don't go there. Contemplation has, and in general, again, Orthodox Christianity, it's all about the facts. It's all about reality. That's why we call it truth, capital T. It has nothing to do with imagination, has nothing to do with theories, nothing to do with rational thought, emotional assumptions. It's just It's not a superstition. It's about preserving the facts as they have been delivered to us. And I want to say yes, from our God, from our Lord. So, and then they've been practiced and experienced, because when you practice certain things and you see that across the board over generations, the same thing is leading to similar results or the same results, then you have, you can draw some scientific conclusions on that too. Now, in my view, science is just barely catching up with the truth, which is okay, that's fine. But I think it's important to mention it because so many people nowadays are like striving to adjust according to scientific research. They try to, put science on a pedestal. But in reality, science doesn't know everything, and science is only catching up with the lore that our ancestors have had for millennia. Okay, so let's get into this topic. With all that being said, my wishes for you is to stay sober-headed, right? Sober-minded, sober-headed, follow the facts. Okay, so this is on contemplation, the highest form of knowledge. Again, lecturer is His Eminence Bishop of Nikopol, Bulgaria. His name is Victor. He comes from the Orthodox Christian Church, the old calendar Bulgarian Orthodox Church. And they have preserved the Orthodox tradition as it's always been. In other words, they refused to accept the new calendar, and they refused to partake of the ecumenical movement, which is a heresy. You can do your research, and I've talked about it, but further on might be helpful. So, I will again share the link of this. Is I watched this on a YouTube presentation with him. It is available on YouTube, but again, it's in the Bulgarian language. So, feel free to check the resource. Here is what he says. Basically, he says that contemplation is the highest degree of knowledge, or the highest form of knowledge. And contemplation in Bulgarian language is Съзерцание. Now, those of you who follow my channel, I do mention a lot of times, I go in depth with regards to translating words. They're so important. Whether our mind shapes the words or our words shape, our mind, that's another question I'll leave in your hands. But there is something that goes so much in depth when you go into old languages, and I can speak about Bulgarian language because the old Bulgarian language is Church Slavonic. Church Slavonic is old Bulgarian language. It's not Russian, I'm sorry. It's not Serbian, I'm sorry. It's Bulgarian, it's old Bulgarian language. And you can follow the history, again, facts, follow the facts. And you can learn about Cyril and Methodius, who are saints who introduced the Cyrillic alphabet, and they basically modified the Bulgarian alphabet. Before that, we had symbols, and they modified them to create the Cyrillic alphabet, which later Russians took from us, and they modified it to sound more Russian. So, in Bulgarian language, the word Съзерцание is contemplation. And I could not come up with any other word in English other than contemplation itself, because Съзерцание is, it literally refers to something that you are participating experientially into while bringing your focus. You're fully present and you bring your focus onto something. So he says, in the history of the church, the Orthodox Christian Church, of course, contemplation has always been a practice of just a handful of ascetics. In other words, all those saints you hear about, that are not just hundreds but thousands of them, they have achieved a level of sainthood, but not all of them have been able to experience true contemplation. And I think that's important because it just shows how our human nature acts as a barrier, and it can be real difficult to achieve that. And people who claim that they levitate and they are doing some astral projection and they can do this, they immediately know it. I want to encourage you to be very suspicious. It's not that easy to contemplate. Again, I'll just stick to this topic here. So he says, contemplation is a state in which the mind of the ascetic, the word is ispada, so falls, or kind of like goes into the state, not of its own free will and not through its own efforts. It is a state in which the mind is in a state of admiration. We say восхищение. It's almost like like awe. So the mind is in this state of awe, like admiration, awe. To use the Church Slavonic word, again, восхищение, like восхита. In other words, the mind is like snatched. We say grabnut, it's like taken away, almost like it's just snatched all of a sudden of its, what is it snatched out of its human, fleshly experience. And so this becomes unexpectedly, it becomes unexpected for the ascetic himself or herself. So it's not something that you're chasing and pursuing. It's not something that's a skill you will develop because you want it and you set your mind on. It's something that happens out of your control, beyond your expectation. He says, again, he continues, he says, let's start kind of like chronologically, one after another, or following the order, with the study of Saint Justin Popovich. He explains that in the philosophy of the Holy Fathers, the word contemplation, again, Съзерцание, which actually in the Greek language is translated as theoria, you can see here how big, and he also adds here how you can see how big changes, how significant those changes in language can be, since you guys and we all know how theoria, being close to the word theory, can mean one thing, and very much like in the English language, a theory can be just like an opinion, a suspicion, you have an idea. So does it mean the same thing in Bulgarian language? But in the Greek language, he explains it means something completely different. It stands for contemplation. So basically, yet again, theoria in the Greek language means contemplation, and that's also in accordance with the philosophy of the Holy Orthodox Christian Fathers. Now, I thought further about this word in English, contemplation, and I came up with another word, maybe meditation, and maybe vigil. Vigil sounds like a good word for me when I think in Bulgarian language. Bdenie, because bdenie is to not fall asleep, to keep your focus on something. Съзерцание is a little better because it goes more like within, not even your senses, within. You're literally just sinking, going in depth of that contemplation. But I thought of the word meditation too because I have a sense that it's sometimes interchangeably used with contemplation, and it can be also misunderstood. Now I'm familiar with Hinduism, for example, and Buddhism, which are traditions that have a heavy emphasis on meditation, but that's a different form of use. And again, as a mental health therapist, I've mentioned this in my videos. You guys know that I'm not doing any therapy on my videos. I'm just talking here about Bulgarian culture and tradition and faith. But I cannot not extricate this from what I know from mental health. We often talk about meditation, but that's yet another type and form of meditation. In mental health, meditation is typically used so as to calm down the nervous system and to bring what we call emotion regulation. Once a person can meditate in this level, so as to calm down their nervous system, then they can regulate their emotions, then they can use a clearer mindset to execute choices of their own. On the other hand, in Hinduism, Buddhism, and some other traditions, meditation is a different tool. It's actually something that it's a tool, basically. There may be specific words, specific vibrations that are induced so that the practitioner repeats them in order to achieve a certain state of mind and or being. But again, that's not what Orthodox Christians mean by contemplation. And if you want to use the word meditation, vigil, then I want to say, again, signaling to you all, be careful with that. So Bishop Victor continues further as he explains that it is a prayerful, in a way grateful, I want to say grace-filled. In Bulgarian language, it's blagodarno. It's like being filled with gratefulness, appreciativeness. So Basically he says again, it is a prayerful, grateful concentration of the soul on the, he says, clever mysteries. And he's quoting here Father Saint Justin Popovich, in the way in which he spoke about this. Now, again, language is very tricky. You can see though what it connotes. This kind of contemplation is filled with prayerfulness and with gratefulness. And it's a contemplation of the soul. And it says it's a contemplation on the clever mysteries. We call them umnite taini. These are mysteries that relate to the intellect, high intellect. Not clever like mischievous, not clever like, oh, you're so smart. We're talking about high intellect here. Reasoning powers, high intellect. And then, let's see. Yeah, he also talks about those, how they're basically typically unattainable to the human mind. So, let's go here. So then he says that according to Saint Isaac, actually, not only the Trinity God, but also the human personality, himself or herself, as well as the nature of God-created creatures, can have access to that state of being. So let's see. So we are all basically, we have access to the clever mysteries. So he says, let's draw some attention to this last statement, or that last point. The essence of the creatures that are created by God. Like, what do we mean? So you'll see that Bishop Victor really pauses so he can go in more in depth of a lot of those words. So the essence, he says, by the essence, what's meant is these are the ideas that God has put into every created creature. That's it. So the ideas that God has put into every created creature. In Greek, that's logos. But if this is achieved, this essence, in contemplation, that is, in a special state in which the ascetic can receive a revelation, it means that this essence, capital E, is fundamentally unknowable, непознаваема, so it cannot be known. It is fundamentally unknowable to any other kind of knowledge. At least this would be so for the lowest kind of knowledge. In the ladder, or like succession of knowledge, or I should say in the hierarchy of knowledge. In other words, this is the knowledge that is achieved by exploring the material world, or like the fleshly world. And so the essence, even of creations, of material creations, is not even otherwise knowable. So again, this is not knowable, not accessible to our own knowledge in any other way either. So coming back to, we talk about, modern, Western, I don't know if I should call it Western, let's just stick with the term of modern science, because it's spread out throughout the world. It really focuses primarily on things that are tangible, that can be perceived by our five senses. We can see, we can taste, we can smell, we can touch, we can hear. That's been the primary focus of science. But he's talking here about something that our flesh cannot perceive. It cannot know. So there is a higher intellect, a higher way of knowing the facts of reality, of truth. Further on, he says, when it comes to essences, to that which is transcendent, so to speak, which is beyond the phenomenon, then knowledge can only be done in this way. In other words, it can be accomplished in this way. So, again, as far as we're discussing the nature of essence or essences of the created beings, to the degree of which it can be transcendent, we can go beyond it, this is the only way in which that kind of knowledge can be achieved. So in other words, we can receive it, so to speak, he says, indirectly from revelation, but from the revelation that we read or are told about. So some people are revealed to that knowledge. Those have been the handful of ascetics mentioned earlier. Other people, more like us laity, can read about this, and we can know about it secondarily, so to speak. Not experientially, but by reading about it, using your executive functioning, like your reasoning powers. He says that Saint Justin put it elsewhere as a revelation by ear. So yes, we can hear about the revelation, we can read about the revelation, or we can experience it, but that's difficult. And in the Orthodox tradition, learning about the revelation by ear, we call that also the oral tradition. So in Contemplation, Съзерцанието, the personality of the ascetic of faith lives above the senses, he explains, above the categories of time and space, kind of like beyond. So she or he feels living, alive, or close, like a living and close connection, I should say, with the upper world, and feeds on a revelation in which he or she finds the, let's say, according to the expression he's quoting here, like of the Holy Apostle Paul, basically he finds this experience of no eye has seen, no ear has heard, and no man has come to mind, and to no man it has come to mind. So basically this is what the ascetic who is experiencing contemplation comes close to. Saint Justin further explains, Bishop Victor reminds us, that this Serbian language, in the Serbian language, there is no word that is adequate, or at least approximately close to or adequate by correspondence to the Greek word theoria. So he explains that for this reason, Saint Justin Popovich uses more descriptive language, so that it can be translated in his own native language as spiritual sight, seeing, looking, considering, introspecting. So the words he uses to explain contemplation are those, once again, spiritual sight, seeing, looking, considering, consideration, and introspection, introspecting. And so in this way, that is why he says it is better to use the Church Slavonic word Съзерцание, because it more fully gives meaning to the Greek word theoria. So it's interesting, that's what Bishop Victor is doing here. He is using different saints' interpretations based on how much in depth they could go, so that we can understand, he can explain to us what contemplation is about. And I thought that's really interesting. Just because a certain language may be impoverished in certain ways, it doesn't mean that that's a necessarily good, bad, thing. I mean, in this case, it just fascinates me how Saint Justin Popovich actually uses this weakness from the Serbian language to find those other words in order to go more in depth of what contemplation means, which didn't exist in their language, as we're informed here. And then later on, people like Bishop Victor can, compile that information in order to bring it on to our own understanding, so that we, little laity people here, may benefit from this. I think that's amazing. It's just something to recognize and appreciate. So let's see. So I did make a little note here that in Bulgarian language, those words that Saint Justin used, again, spiritual sight, seeing, looking, considering, introspecting, in Bulgarian language they are духовно зрение. That spiritual зрение is зрявам, like being able to look, see. Виждане is you notice something. Гледане is you continue to contemplate, like you gaze at something. Разглеждане may be translated as you take consideration of something, you're going over material so that you can go more in depth. And then вглъбяване. This has no English translation other than going really in the depths of your own head, of your own psyche, of your own mind. So I just put those here for those of you who may also know some Bulgarian language, because they're very profound and deep words. Let's see. So further on, Bishop Victor says that we could say on our part that fortunately in the Bulgarian language, he says, this word contemplation, Съзерцание, has been preserved from the ancient Slavonic language. However, we have to be definitely careful that when a word exists in the language, we have to be watchful, careful in terms of what the meanings are, with which that word is burdened in the current modern day of our life, in the colloquial language, so to speak. So in the Bulgarian language, the word contemplation carries something from the idea of the Church Slavonic term, he says, of the ecclesiastical term contemplation, Съзерцание, which means usually not just looking at something, but somehow very carefully, with a desire to penetrate, to go in depth, or on the other hand, with experience, so experientially, to go beyond and in depth. But these meanings, of course, are not enough to convey the meaning of this word he adds in addition to all of that, as it is used in the ascetic writings of the Holy Fathers. Namely, this is contemplation, though not of something, not of creatures as we perceive them in this world, but a contemplation of something of the spiritual world, of something beyond, something inaccessible to the senses. It is also inaccessible to the mind, as much as we have said, falling into this state as a matter of maybe like rapture or being taken, grabvane, like smitten, taken, breath taken in a way. It's a matter of admiration of the ascetic's mind when God's grace deigns. So in other words, again, he's emphasizing here on how it's when God grants this and not when we humans choose to. From this point of view, in this sense, it is inaccessible to the mind. Otherwise, it is accessible to the mind only when the mind is introduced to this state. Let's see what he says. When the person or the ascetic is in a state of awe, experiential contemplation, the state of, I want to be careful with the rapture because I know that there are sects in the West that misunderstand this. So I want to call this state of experiential contemplation awe. So when the person or the ascetic is in this state of awe, experiential contemplation, in Greek, he says, it is denoted by the word ecstasy. Okay, so the Greeks explain this state of being as being on ecstasy. Of course, this has nothing to do with your fleshly pills and drugs. This, you guys, this is really going a lot more in depth. Again, being able to naturally achieve this level of existence, or of experience, I should say, because I don't even know if somebody can exist there in the flesh, but who knows, I don't know. From what I'm learning here, a handful have been able to experience contemplation throughout the ages. So, okay, continuing. He also says, let us therefore explain that it is inaccessible to the senses. Okay, so in the previous paragraph, he said it's inaccessible to our mind in general, and also here he is reminding us that it's also inaccessible to our senses. But speaking of the senses, we mean everything. That is, not only the senses with which we perceive the material world, but also the so-called spiritual inner senses. So not only our physical senses, sight, hearing, taste, smell, and tactile senses, but we're also talking about spiritual inner senses. So it is inaccessible to all of those senses. We should be mindful of that. And it makes me think of how humbling that is. So let's just notice that. So he further on says that further Saint Isaac endeavors to put into words his vast gracious experience in precisely such states of contemplation as much as human words and in general human sense, human meanings can convey and express these super intelligent, like beyond intelligence, or like inaccessible to the mind in its ordinary state, truths of faith as an experience. And so he tries to explain to some extent what contemplation means. In general, the Holy Fathers quite often refer to inner spiritual experience when they attempt to explain something. It is not uncommon to find such expressions which are difficult to convey, let alone comprehend. He who has this, he says, in other words, he who has this spiritual experience understands, he says, what I'm talking about. This is coming from Bishop Victor. He further on says, according to the teaching of Saint Isaac of Syria, contemplation is a sensation, усещане, a sensation, in the sense of perception, but not sensory experience. And it's a sensation of the divine mysteries, or God's mysteries, that are hidden in the creatures and their causes, that which leads to being a creature, to being created. Contemplation is expressed in subtle activity, work of the mind, and in divine meditation. I struggled again with those translations here. Божествено съзерцание, that's like godly contemplation. Again, those words can be interchangeable in the English language. When we use the word meditation, again, they're really talking about noticing and going in depth. Okay, further on he says, as well as in a state of being in prayer. Almost like we stay, when we can stay, keep vigil during a lengthy prayer. This contemplation can actually be given to us. It can actually happen during prayer. So it, let's see, it enlightens the rational part of the soul. And he says here we have to stop and give a clarification because it is very synthesized as it is already. He says in general everything has to be explained. He's referring here to how Saint Isaac of Syria tends to speak in a very synthetic manner, which if you guys have read his works, they're astonishing, so much in depth. I have learned, and I am learning above and beyond about the field of mental health and psychology from him, things that people have not even begun to consider and comprehend. He already has talked about centuries ago. So Saint Isaac is who the Bishop Victor is talking about. Okay, so he makes a pause here. So he says, let us explain. He says, let us begin with this last statement. The statement was, it enlightens. Let's change something here. Okay, sorry. Getting distracted with my recordings here. Okay, he says, the statement was, it enlightens the rational part of the soul. So Bishop Victor is like, okay, let's go into this. What on earth does that mean? So he says this has been addressed in the past. This is what Saint Isaac calls the purification of the mind. We say очистване на ума. This is opposed to the purification of the heart. It happens namely during contemplation, but when we say that this is a subtle work of the mind and divine reflections, again, божествено размишление, this is our contemplation on godly matters, contemplating God, as well as in a state of prayer. This is what it actually means, is what he says. But the abiding of prayer itself, he emphasizes, is not the state. It is usually the time or action of the soul of the ascetic during which this happens. So usually the mind of the ascetic is caught delighted when he's in prayer. The word here is vaskhiten, and I really would like to go with the word awe instead, but delight and awe. So again, it's not the prayer that's contemplation, but contemplation can happen during the course of a prayer, of a sincere prayer, real deep, lengthy, vigilant kind of prayer. Excuse me. It can lead to that. And that's what he says he means by when the mind of the ascetic is caught into the state of experiencing delight and awe because of the contemplation during prayer. Okay, so he further on says, and as for the fact that it is divine reflection, again, contemplation, reflecting on God, a subtle work of the mind, here he says, Saint Isaac, who in general speaks in a very synthesized manner, he says, I allow myself to translate something of his works, of the works from Saint Theophan the Recluse, who explains this same thing much more comprehensibly, much more broadly, more interpreted, kind of like better clarified, and with an approach from a different point of view, so that it is better accessible to us laity people. And so Bishop Victor says that Saint Theophan the Recluse goes on to say this, that he's quoting the apostle who says, the Spirit of God dwells in you, or I will receive the promise of the Spirit through faith, capital F. It should be noted that this indwelling of God, we call that in Bulgarian language vseljavane na Boga. This is like embodiment, when God dwells in us. And, those of you who know the introductory prayers, to the Holy Spirit, we are praying to the Holy Spirit to dwell in us, come and dwell, basically. So so yes, the word is vseljavane na Boga. So again, he says, it should be noted that this dwelling within ourselves of God, is not only accomplished by thought, mysleno. You can't just imagine it. You understand why this is so. He says, it's not just mental activity. He explains it's because when we talk about reflection or thinking, you can think something completely different from reality. This is not concerning the usual thinking or reflection, therefore. It's not only mental, such as there is in the thought of God when we think of God on the part of men. That is, when we think, exercising our mind in the words of God. So he says, let's say we can mentally imagine, we can trace the earthly footprints of our Savior. Like, we can imagine how he was continually persecuted. We can imagine, right? We can imagine how he was delivered to the unrighteous court. We can also imagine how he made the greatest sacrifice on way to Calvary, Golgotha. We can imagine how he offered himself as a sacrifice. We can imagine how he has redeemed mankind with his blood. All of these things are to the ascetics as one practice of asceticism, as a spiritual exercise. So imagining our God's, our Lord's life can be viewed as an ascetic exercise, but it's not contemplation. That's what he's saying here. So they often think, like they reflect in depth, contemplating, they notice, they contemplate, they think about those things, our Lord's life, because this is a very good preparation for prayer. So it's an ascetic exercise to imagine our Lord's life. So contemplation, however, is not about that either. So contemplation is not that kind of imagination. And yes, we laity may say, we can talk about imagining the clouds and the sun, and we can fantasize. That's not even what we're talking about. We're talking about this ascetic exercise of imagining God's life. And again, our bishop is bringing our attention here to really understand that contemplation is not that either. So Saint Theophan the Recluse explains very well that there is a difference here as well between imagination and contemplation. Contemplation is not thinking, it's not imagination, it's not reflection, and it's not reasoning. So it is not a mental thought as there is, for example, in the divine reflection, like reflection on God, again, on the part of man. And by, how can I say this, by favor on the part of God, or by the grace of God. So contemplation is not about mental thinking, and it's not about It's not about the grace of God either. But this indwelling of the Holy Spirit, this dwelling experience, which he calls again awe or admiration, восхищение, as was said, he actually offers a different point of view of the same thing. Let's see. So it is a life, and God thinking should be considered only as a means of achieving it. How can I translate that for you guys? I don't know. Like, yes. What he's trying to say here is that being alive in God and going in depth of contemplation over God should only be seen as a tool, as a means of getting closer into a state of contemplation, if God so wills to give it to us. Saint Isaac said that this tool or means of prayer is just that, basically. And let's see, after all, he says, the mind of the ascetic can be taken even when he, for instance, is just reading the Holy Scriptures or some patristic texts. So it doesn't have to be that you have to really only think about, God during prayer. It doesn't have to be that you're breathing in and out with the Jesus prayer. It doesn't. You can only and simply be reading the Holy Scriptures, the Bible. You can be reading patristic texts, and that's when contemplation may also grab you. That's what he's saying. Okay, so further on, устремяването на ума, let's see, I had difficulty translating this word, but he speaks about the aspiration of the mind, and ustrem, the word here actually means the stream or the flow of mind, when the mind is going in one direction. So that aspiration, that flow, that stream of mind and heart towards God, under God's grace. In other words, only when God, as God permits it to go, because we can only go forward and at a speed that only God allows us to go, right? We're talking about mind and heart. Our mind and heart can follow God as strongly, as aspiringly as he grants. It's none of us, none of our own doing. So he says, this prepares man for receiving God through the truth, capital T. It is such a unity in which, without devouring the powers and the personality or the identity of the human, of man, God is the one who acts in man, in him. And he is the one who causes or invites man both to want and to act. And man, according to the apostle, does not live, but Christ lives in him. I think it said, I no longer live, but it is Christ who lives in me, right? So here is where he says that the goal, not only of man's goal, but also God's goal, God himself has a goal for us, and the goal is that God's purpose for each one of us is being able to experience this state of contemplation. So I also want to note here, before I begin to I draw a line here, it's going to be, again, we're going to wrap up for today. I'll continue with part 2 and maybe part 3. This is real in-depth and difficult, but I want to draw your attention to something. So I feel limited when I'm trying to translate the word man in the English language. I don't know how to convey it. I am mindful that in many Protestant sects, it's actually even misused, because man is kind of like, well, and not just Protestant, but people who don't even consider themselves faithful and religious also make that kind of interpretation or connection or association of men and women being somehow, those words being condescendingly used against women. And in general, human in the English language, you take the H and the U plus man, and it's very much, many Westerners will say that this is very much based in the patristic kind of like theology or background, which undermines women's rights. This is very different from Bulgaria. This is so different from the old traditions. I really want to emphasize this. Let's not assume that the culture we live in, i.e. the Western culture nowadays, this modern culture, let's not assume that this is everything there is out there. The reason I say this is because, take this for example. The simple word for a man in Bulgarian language is muž. Muž. That's it, muž. You can write it in English, I guess, as M-U-Z-H, I guess. M-U-J, it's pronounced muž. The word for woman in Bulgarian language is žena. That would be Z-H-E-N-A, žena. In English, there is no such thing as a ž, but we use that letter. So muž is man, žena is a woman. We also use those words for a husband and a wife. In other words, the spouse, male spouse, female spouse. But when we use the word for a human, it has nothing to do with male patristic background, because the word is човек. Where is muž, žena, and then you have this word човек. Човек used to be человек. And basically, what I'm trying to say here is that our word for human does not include man or woman. It's a neutral word, which includes the background connotation, the root of identity and personality. So the word human in Bulgarian language means човек, which actually comes from человек, which, if you think further about our words, our forehead is a cello. This is the face that you present to the world. The face, we are created in the image and likeness of God. The face is that image that we are created after. We have God's print. So when you think of a human being, there is nothing like in Bulgarian language that alludes to male patriarchy and all that nonsense. And honestly, guys, I'm tired of this. I do call it a nonsense. This is my own judgment, and I can talk at length about this. It's a phenomenon that's become very important in the Western cultures due to their own oppression and discrimination, which is serious. That's been going on since the Dark Ages. But this experience has nothing to do with us in East Europe. And we can follow the way our language is constructed. We can look into our history. So that's why I want to translate, and I want to take this into small parts to bring your attention to this. So the word for human being in Bulgarian language comes from the face, the identity, the personality that we have. And when you think about what the Bible tells us, we are created in the image and likeness of God. That's exactly it. What is the face that we put out there? What is the personality, the identity, the print that we carry? It's not about what gender I am. It's not about, it's not about man, woman. I'll just leave it in this. So I want to invite you to contemplate. I know again and again, I do bring up, a lot of difficult topics, and it is very difficult and challenging for me to translate, but I am doing my best as I can. I printed those sheets of paper, and I went to a coffee shop, and I was handwriting my own little notes that I wanted to share with you all. I feel like this is so important that we can bring up and spread throughout humanity, period. If we all are created by the same creator. Everybody deserves to know this, and let's put an end to distortions. Let's challenge distortions. Let's challenge assumptions. Mental health has helped me, at least, to gain that knowledge and language, to draw the attention to that, because mental health is about challenging distortions. And in mental health, we know that human beings are prone to falling into distortions. You can check. Just Google, unhelpful thinking styles. Google CBT, cognitive behavior therapy. Google cognitive distortions, and you can see none of us is spared. We all are so flawed. We are prone to making mistakes of the mind, of our perception, of our senses. We don't have a full grasp of reality as it is. And so stepping out of the box of one language, and by one language, I don't only mean English. I'm really, really referring here to, I should say the umbrella of like the Latin languages, because they are the languages that are most popular nowadays. Most people talk about, learning some kind of a form of a Latin language, because it promises them more success in life. These are the prosperous money kind of generating or promising realms. If I know English, I will have more versatility at finding a job rather than if I know Bulgarian, unfortunately. But then again, I believe this is part of God's plan. It is very humbling. Being humbled is not being humiliated. Bear that in mind. Humiliated is being suppressed, oppressed, being less than. Being humbled is actually being restored to reality. For example, when you go to the chiropractor and chiropractor adjusts your structure so that you can feel better. You can feel and hear some cracks. It may even shock you, scare you, whatever, maybe even hurt, I don't know. But ultimately, you're restored back to a healthy posture. That's humbling. Humiliating is what has happened in the dark ages with the actions of slavery and oppression and creating, using power and control to dominate over certain categories of people. And that's where I have a problem with the West, specifically when the West is emphasizing on the words man and woman, and then human, again deriving from patristic background theology. These are just small squares of realms of perception, and they don't take under account the thousands years of history that a culture such as mine has brought into the world. And you don't have to know Bulgarian language, but let me tell you this: the Bulgarian language can open avenues towards understanding better those things that are otherwise veiled from us. When you switch the language, when you change one word for another, it can give you so much more clarity. It can literally set you free. So, yeah, I'm inviting you to step out of the boxes. I think every one of us is in a box. We all come into this world. We get conditioned based on the culture we live in, based on the things that happen to us. And it does take a challenge. It does take a struggle to step out of those boxes. So yeah, I want to invite you to step out of the boxes and consider, things that carry more depth. So I will follow up as soon as I can with part 2. I hope this finds you well. After all, yes, my videos go, lengthy. You can pause. You can even break them apart and make them into smaller chunks so you can listen and watch if you are interested. If you're not interested, don't bother, right? But if you're interested, use your own agency, your own free will to choose whether you want to listen to them in small chunks, or you don't even have to look at the videos to hear that information. Usually I know how I am when I learn information that I want to acquire. I take notes. I can listen to podcasts or even YouTube videos when I'm driving, and I set them aside. I don't have to look at them to hear them. They can run on my Bluetooth and I can be commuting and I'm gathering the information. I can read books, I can journal. There's so many ways, so long that the desire is there and the will is there. And if it's not, don't force yourself. I mean, you know best for yourself. Hey, that's the whole beauty of having a free will. So as far as I go here, I will continue to be as busy for a little longer until things settle with me. So that is going to probably push me into the direction of making videos in a more sporadic manner. You might see a couple of videos within a few weeks and then maybe no video until next month. But I want to send you my best of wishes to all of you. I want to thank you for your comments and support again. And I want you to know that I'm taking your questions in consideration. there is something that I've been contemplating as well. Like on one of you recently was asking the question about how do I form a nest? How do I find my own nest of people, my own realm of people? And I think these are so profound and so important questions, because we human beings are created to be in a community. We're not created to exist in isolation. We can survive in isolation, but we thrive together. We all deserve, and we are created for this nest of, I want to say in Orthodox terms, one-mindedness. So all that being said, I am taking that to heart and I'm reflecting on this. I have a few thoughts, and in the upcoming videos I plan to insert some of those thoughts, to include some of those things. But all in all, I hope this finds you well. Do take care of yourselves and take it easy. Take it easy and keep the good struggle. I should say that this is our Orthodox greeting for hello and goodbye, because one thing that's true is we're always going to be struggling. And I should insert this here to tell you, many people fantasize about leaving the country, going and living somewhere in a better country, better government, better places. But the reality is that wherever you go, you have to bring your own self there. And just because you live on a holy land doesn't guarantee salvation. If you don't struggle the good struggle, what does that mean? Checking in with your own personal distortions, challenging your own ingrained set of superstitious beliefs, exploring, looking at your own soul and seeing, like, checking in your own conscience. If we all don't do that, it doesn't matter where we live. We can live on Mount Athos, supposedly, if you're a man, and not achieve salvation. People can make grave mistakes if they are on a holy land, as well as if they are out in the world. The point is, are you living a godly life, God-pleasing? I don't know how to translate in English, but yes, a life of humility, of care. Are you looking at your own soul? As we in mental health say, we call it the shadow of the self. Are you looking at your own shadow, at that part that you're wanting to deny and suppress and avoid? Are you looking at it, naming it, identifying it, bringing it out to confession, bringing it out to exploration, to correction? This is what the human struggle and human growth consists of. So yeah, I hope the struggle is a good one for you. And you are in my prayers, and I appreciate you, and I hope this finds you well. Thank you. Bye-bye.